Every major mining company on Earth looked at this place and walked away. The altitude alone nearly kills you. The storms never stop. The roads will swallow your equipment whole. They called it unminable. Then China arrived with $7 billion. The whole world laughed. Nobody's laughing anymore. There's a mountain in Peru where the air is so thin, walking 50 steps feels like running a race, where temperatures drop so fast that metal cracks overnight, where snowstorms don't visit, they move in, for months. And somewhere beneath that frozen, hostile ground lies one of the richest copper deposits on the face of the earth. For decades, the world's most powerful mining companies, Swiss giants, Canadian corporations, British conglomerates, all came here, studied the numbers, and made the same decision. They left. Some of them left in a hurry. One company lost $50 million in a single afternoon just trying to move equipment up the mountain road. The place earned a nickname that stuck, the Hell Mine. So when China showed up in 2014 and paid over $7 billion to buy it, lock, stock, and frozen pipeline, the reaction from Western analysts was almost universal. They called it reckless. Some called it delusional. Financial commentators wrote pieces explaining in careful detail exactly why China had just thrown $7 billion into a hole in the ground. Here's the part nobody expected. A decade later, that hole in the ground has produced $27 billion worth of copper. The remaining reserves are valued at nearly $100 billion, and the analysts who predicted failure have, very quietly, stopped talking about it. This is the full story of Las Bambas, the mine the world gave up on, and the decision that changed everything. To really understand what China pulled off here, you need to understand just how brutal this place actually is. Las Bambas sits in the Apurimac region of the Peruvian Andes, more than 4,000 meters above sea level. That's higher than most of the Alps, higher than the base camps that mountain climbers train for months just to reach. At that altitude, the air contains only 60% of the oxygen you'd breathe at sea level. That doesn't sound catastrophic until you're the one trying to operate a hydraulic drill, or carry a steel component across an open pit, or troubleshoot a conveyor system at midnight in sub-zero temperatures. Your body is running on less than it needs, constantly. Headaches, nausea, dizziness. These aren't occasional side effects at Las Bambas. They're part of the daily schedule. And then the weather arrives. Snowstorms hit this area on more than 200 days every year. Not light flurries, real multi-day storms that freeze pipes, disable engines, close roads, and make it impossible to do anything except wait. One early international exploration team was caught in a 2-week continuous storm so severe they abandoned their entire camp. Just left everything and retreated down the mountain. Getting equipment there in the first place was its own kind of nightmare. For most of its history, Las Bambas had exactly one access road, a single-lane dirt track winding through cliffs, heavily iced in winter and barely wide enough for a standard truck. Moving large mining machinery meant disassembling it completely, hauling it up piece by piece, and rebuilding it on-site at altitude. The cost? At minimum 3 times what you'd pay at any normal mine. In 2013, Swiss mining giant Glencore tried to transport a large industrial crusher up that road. The vehicle lost control on a cliff section. The crusher went over the edge. $50 million, gone in an afternoon. And then there was the environmental problem, arguably the most complex challenge of all. Las Bambas sits in the headwaters of the Amazon River basin. The ecological sensitivity of that location means Peruvian environmental regulations are extraordinarily strict. Mining wastewater from Las Bambas must contain copper ion levels below 0.1 milligrams per liter. For context, that standard is 150 times stricter than normal drinking water requirements. A Canadian company found this out the hard way in 2009. They began extraction, damaged local water sources, and were hit with a $20 million fine before being ordered to shut down completely. They never came back. By the early 2010s, The global mining industry had collectively, quietly agreed. Las Bambas was a geological treasure that was simply too expensive, too dangerous, and too complicated to actually mine. The consensus was clear: leave it alone. That consensus lasted right up until the moment China ignored it. Here's the thing about China's decision that most outside commentary missed entirely. This wasn't corporate adventurism. This wasn't a vanity project. This was desperation dressed up as ambition. And it makes perfect sense once you understand China's copper problem. China is the world's largest manufacturing economy. It is also, by a significant distance, the world's largest consumer of copper. The metal is in everything: electric motors, power cables, construction wiring, consumer electronics, military equipment. China's industrial machine runs on copper the way a car engine runs on oil. The problem? China's domestic copper reserves are nowhere near enough to meet that demand. China has proven copper reserves of roughly 99 million tons. The entire world has about 700 million tons. China, despite being one of the largest countries on Earth by land area, holds less than 4% of global copper reserves. The math is brutal and unavoidable. By 2014, China was importing more than 4.5 million tons of refined copper every year. 80% of that came from just two countries, Chile and Peru. That's not a supply chain. That's a dependency. And dependencies have a way of becoming vulnerabilities at the worst possible moments. In 2014, workers at Chile's state copper company went on strike. A labor dispute, nothing directed at China, nothing geopolitical. But the news crossed the Pacific in seconds, and Chinese copper prices jumped 5% in a single trading day. 5%, because of a workers' strike in another country. That moment crystallized something that Chinese planners had been worrying about for years. Without direct control over your resource supply, even the world's most powerful industrial base is fragile. You're always one foreign policy shift, one strike, one sanctions package away from a crisis you can't manage. And the stakes were rising fast. China's electric vehicle industry was exploding. A conventional car uses around 23 kilograms of copper. An electric vehicle uses roughly 4 times as much in its batteries, its motors, its charging systems. With Chinese EV production already approaching 5 million units annually and accelerating, the copper math was becoming almost alarming. Add solar panels, add wind turbines, add the cables and transformers of a national smart grid. Every piece of the energy transition China was betting its economic future on, all of it hungry for copper. Las Bambas, with 10 million tons of proven copper reserves, stopped looking like a reckless gamble and started looking like a strategic necessity. In 2014, China's state-backed consortium led by MMG paid over $7 billion to acquire it from Glencore, the largest cross-border mining deal ever backed by Chinese banks. The West laughed. They wouldn't laugh for long. Part 3. The engineers who refused to quit. What happened next inside Las Bambas, the actual physical transformation of a place that had defeated everyone, is the part of this story that rarely gets told, and it deserves to be. The Chinese engineering teams who arrived in the mid-2010s walked into conditions that had broken some of the most experienced operations in the world. They knew this going in. They came anyway. In their first 3 months on site, they were hit by consecutive sandstorms so severe that basic camp setup was impossible for weeks at a time. Engineers wore gas masks to conduct surveys in near-zero visibility. The surveys had to be done. The schedule didn't move. Then the geology started fighting back. The Andes are tectonically active. Earthquakes are common. Underground rock structures shift. The main mine tunnel alone had to be completely redesigned and rebuilt 3 separate times due to geological changes discovered after construction had already begun. Each rebuild cost hundreds of millions of yuan. Each setback was absorbed, documented, and folded into the next attempt. At one point, a sudden rainstorm triggered a landslide that wiped out a newly completed access road. 30 workers were stranded mid-mountain with no ground route down. They survived on helicopter-dropped supplies for days until the road could be reopened. Equipment failure added another layer of complexity. Mining machinery designed for sea-level conditions consistently underperformed at 4,000 meters, where air pressure is lower, temperature swings are extreme, and standard engines lose significant power output. Rather than keep fighting their equipment, Chinese engineers went back to domestic research institutions and co-developed custom high-altitude mining machinery, gear specifically engineered for Andean conditions. It took time. It cost money. But it worked. The old access road was replaced entirely. Using drone surveys to map the mountain terrain with precision, Chinese teams carved a 4-lane paved road through sections of sheer cliff face, a feat of mountain engineering that opened the mine to consistent, large-scale equipment movement for the first time in its history. And then there was the control center. China invested $100 million building a remote operations hub in Lima, Peru's capital, at sea level, connected to Las Bambas through a purpose-built 5G network. From that center, engineers can monitor and control 80% of mine operations without anyone standing at the pit face. Drilling systems, ore processors, environmental sensors, excavators, all remotely managed, all monitored in real time. In 2023, that system proved its worth in a way that no report could fully capture. A landslide threatened the mine area. The intelligent monitoring network detected the warning signs early and issued an automated alert. Every single worker on site was evacuated in 10 minutes, 0 casualties. In a place where previous undetected landslides had been catastrophic, 10 minutes was everything. Smart helmets monitored each worker's heart rate and blood oxygen levels continuously. A drop into dangerous territory triggered an immediate supervisor alert. At 4,000 meters, that's not optional technology. That's the difference between catching a problem and losing someone. Part 4. The battle China won without fighting. In 2021, Las Bambas faced a different kind of crisis. And how China handled it may be the most underappreciated part of this entire story. Local communities surrounding the mine, influenced by a sustained wave of negative coverage painting Chinese resource investment as exploitative, organized protests against the operation. Residents feared water contamination, land damage, and a future where a foreign company extracted the region's wealth while leaving nothing behind. The protests escalated until Las Bambas was forced to suspend operations for 50 days. Global copper markets felt it immediately. Prices spiked, supply chains tightened. The world was watching to see how China would respond. China did something unexpected. Instead of legal pressure or political maneuvering, MMG sat down and actually listened. Multiple rounds of direct dialogue with the Peruvian government and community representatives produced concrete commitments. The company pledged increased revenue sharing with local communities. It funded the construction of the Cochapata Bridge, an 80 million yuan project that cut commute times for surrounding residents by 4 hours. For communities where mobility had always been a constraint, 4 hours wasn't symbolic. It was life-changing. On the environmental side, China implemented real-time water quality monitoring across all points where mining could affect local waterways. 34 communities joined a joint reforestation initiative covering 368 hectares. 600,000 trout fingerlings were released into 7 local river systems, a direct gesture toward fishing communities whose livelihoods depended on healthy water. The Heart of Las Bambas program launched regular open community forums where residents could bring questions and concerns directly to mine management. Not press releases, not PR campaigns, actual conversations with actual decision makers. The result, measured over time, speaks for itself. Today, 60% of young people in communities surrounding Las Bambas actively seek employment at the mine, which pays 3 times the local average wage. In a region where economic opportunity was historically scarce, Las Bambas became the engine of real, measurable change. This directly contradicts the most common Western critique of Chinese resource investment in developing nations. The evidence at Las Bambas tells a different story, complicated in places, still evolving, but not extraction. Partnership, however imperfect, is the more accurate word. Part 5. The numbers that changed history. Now for the part that, honestly, silenced the critics. Since operations began, Las Bambas has produced approximately 2.7 million tons of copper. At current global prices of around $10,000 per ton, that's $27 billion of production value, all from a $7 billion investment. The original cost has been returned nearly 4 times over, and the mine is far from finished. Remaining recoverable copper reserves exceed 10 million tons. At today's prices, that's a remaining value of approximately $100 billion still sitting beneath those frozen peaks, now accessible, now operational, now steadily producing. Every year, 400,000 tons of copper concentrate depart from Peru's port of Matarani, cross the Pacific in 23 days, and arrive at Nanjing. From there, the metal flows into Chinese smelters and directly into production lines, making electric vehicle motors, renewable energy cables, and smart grid infrastructure. Las Bambas isn't just a mine. It's a direct supply line from the Peruvian Andes into the heart of China's energy transition. Every electric vehicle rolling off a Chinese production line carries, somewhere inside it, a piece of this mountain. Peru's transformation has been equally real. The Apurimac region's per capita GDP more than tripled, from $1,300 in 2014 to $4,000 by 2023. The mine has paid $1.7 billion in taxes. That's roughly 5% of Peru's entire annual national revenue from a single operation. China isn't done building either. $120 million is committed to expanding the port of Matarani, increasing copper throughput by 50%. A new smelter near the port will process raw concentrate into semi-finished products locally, keeping more of the value chain inside Peru. A planned solar power plant at the mine site aims for 100% renewable energy, a landmark goal for any major global mining operation. The Belgrano Freight Railway renovation, a $200 million investment, is now partially operational, with an annual transport capacity of 2.65 million tons and transportation costs reduced by 80% compared to road haulage. 80%. That single number dismantled the financial case against Las Bambas more completely than any analyst report ever could. Las Bambas is one mine, but it represents something much larger. It's evidence of a strategic philosophy, patient, infrastructure first, long horizon thinking, that China has applied consistently across its overseas resource investments. The philosophy that says, control your supply chains, because the alternative is being controlled by someone else's. In a world racing toward electrification, where copper demand is set to surge dramatically over the next 30 years, that philosophy is going to matter more, not less. You can't substitute copper easily. You can't manufacture it. You find it, mine it carefully, and transport it expensively. And the countries that have already secured access to the major deposits hold a structural advantage that will compound over time. China understood this a decade before the rest of the world was ready to admit it. The mountain didn't change. It's still cold. The storms still come 200 days a year. The air is still thin and unforgiving, and the roads are still hard. What changed was simply who decided to stay. The Western mining world looked at Las Bambas and calculated all the reasons it couldn't work. China looked at the same mountain and decided to solve the problems one by one: the roads, the equipment, the altitude, the community relations, the environment, year after year, setback after setback. That difference in approach has produced a $100 billion asset from a $7 billion bet. It has built a transformed regional economy, a community that chose collaboration, and a copper supply chain feeding the world's largest electric vehicle revolution. The Hell Mine is still cold, but it's producing. And it will keep producing. Long after the people who laughed have moved on to laughing at the next thing China does that they don't yet understand. Some bets only look crazy until the mountain finally delivers. Las Bambas isn't just a story about copper. It's a story about what happens when one country decides that the word impossible is just the beginning of the conversation. While others were writing off the Hell Mine, China was building roads through cliffs, designing custom machinery for the high Andes, and sitting down with local communities to find common ground. That's not luck. That's a method. And the world is starting to notice. If this story made you think, if it changed how you see what's actually happening in the global resource race, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Hit subscribe, because the stories that explain the real world, the ones most channels won't touch, that's exactly what we're here for. Stay sharp, stay curious. We'll see you next time.